Hello there, welcome to part 9 of You're Being Shaped, series of videos I'm doing on Vance Packard's book The People Shapers. What we were discussing in the last video, more on Delgado, and I was talking about the reality of the possibility of a brain chip in the future for humans, and reading on another chapter here called on making man more tractable, and there's a little quote here by a psychiatrist called Peter R. Breggin. It says, "If America ever falls to totalitarianism, the dictator will be a behavioural scientist, and the chief of police will be armed with lobotomy and psychosurgery." And then reading on here, psychiatrist H.L. Newbold, cited earlier, seems to feel that taming man by programming him for tractability should be a major objective of psychiatrists. And a little later here, I've underlined this. Let's read this. "The trouble can be as simple as that of a destructive, hard-to-manage child whose mother seeks help." So we're talking about how this can be applied. A hard-to-manage child. Walter Freeman, this must be another psychosurgeon. Walter Freeman, sometimes called the Dean of Psychosurgeons, cited the case of a toy-smashing 6-year-old who was a real problem to his mother. Oh my God, you better do something, eh? After 2 extensive lobotomies, he reported the child became quite withdrawn but less troublesome. Jeez. Peter Breggin notes that the majority of the many psychosurgery operations performed by Orlando J. Andy, director of neurosurgery at the University of Mississippi, have been on children. They were classified as hyperactive, aggressive, or emotionally unstable. Breggin cited a letter from the psychologist working with Andy, who stated that the operations on the children were to reduce the hyperactivity to levels manageable by parents. Jesus. It's amazing, isn't it? Get them when they're young. Later on it talks about prisoners, being operated on, but what have children, what's the modern learning disorder now? ADHD, isn't it? Attention disorder or something like that. They're saying that there's something wrong with them and they need drugs. Kids are being drugged up now for this, aren't they? By what they call a chemical lobotomy, basically. This is frightening, and this really kind of validates what I was saying about how so many people in the past, when it comes to lobotomies and electroshock therapy and all of that kind of thing, burning parts of the brain, they're just experiments. They're literally guinea pigs, no different than the animals that Delgado really was experimenting on. Because if you have an animal in a cage, it's going to act differently. But one of the things, I guess it was a two-way process. What I mean is that you have the subject that's been operated on to see the direct result, immediate result, but also how does that child or that person interact with society? How do they manage? What are their responses? But also, how do people react to them? And how do they react to their new behaviour? So it's an ongoing experiment, and giving a 6-year-old child a lobotomy, two lobotomies here, 2 extensive lobotomies, and they're looking at the reaction, of the child afterwards. It's no different than drugging them via chemicals if the drugs target the same area of the brain, say. Because if you look down early 19th century, there were all sorts of brutal experiments. When we entered kind of like a scientific area, age, sorry, there was all these horrible experiments, lobotomies, electroshock, and they were very crude, dangerous, mind-altering drugs in their infancy that were given to people in stone houses and lunatic asylums, and places like that. And they would turn you into vegetables, just a dribbling vegetable, and then so obviously they weren't perfected, they couldn't be released into the public. But then, as the years progressed, eventually these kinds of drugs were released into the public, and they became labelled as safe. And basically, it's almost like a chemical lobotomy, maybe, where you can get your subject relatively functional so they can perform menial tasks, basically, and love their servitude, but that's just disturbing. That makes me angry. And later on, in this next page, you have prisoners agreeing for lobotomy so that they can be released. And again, it's if you have a very, very violent prisoner that's been has murdered, has been a serial killer, and maybe if a lobotomy was guaranteed to cure the person, maybe it's more justifiable to experiment on somebody like that. But a 6-year-old child is that's immoral in my view. And reading here, there was a guy that was very anti-system in this prison. He said the man was described as aggressively outspoken, always seeking recruits for his views, that the institution and its staff were oppressing inmates. The man was teaching other inmates karate. He had been involved in a work stoppage. He sought from the outside books attacking society. He set fire in May to demonstrate his political views. In short, he appeared to be a strong-minded dissident, and that reminds me of A Clockwork Orange. I don't know if you saw that one, because that was in the 70s too, as this book was written, and it was about a guy who was the perfect kind of candidate for a scientific experiment. Even though he was criminally minded, he was an outright criminal and dangerous. They agreed that he was the type they were after, and they did a lot of mind control experiments on him, and then released him back into the public, believing that he was going to be safe. If you haven't seen it, watch it, and you know what I'm talking about. It just reminds me of that. It says here certain prisoners agreed to have part of their brains destroyed for an early release, that kind of thing. This section here, it says taming unruly public school children chemically, and it goes on about how I think that they gave them pills without their consent. Yeah. In a barn, in a school in America, thousands of children in public schools were reportedly being drugged during school hours to reduce their unruliness. It was for the children's own good, so the argument went, since they had some sort of brain malfunction. Oh, right. Well, the pills helped quiet their brains so they could be better students in the early grades, and they would stop disrupting the work of the students. So I guess if you change their brain activity, at that age, then they're going to be better when they're older, aren't they? They're going to. At a world conference of psychiatrists, the problem of children with a certain pattern of restlessness has been given a medical label: hyperkinetic syndrome. Sounds like a little bit like ADHD, doesn't it? Attention deficit disorder or something like that. Other psychological orientated doctors called it minimal brain dysfunction or minimal brain damage, but others simply said that the children were hyperactive and let it go. The main symptom was that the children were fidgety. I don't think children are fidgety, are they? I always thought they're quite slow moving, and they always sit down all the time, didn't they? Also, they were easily distracted. And they had short attention spans, and they were impulsive. This is ADHD, isn't it? Who diagnosed these young sufferers? Mainly their teachers. How did the teachers learn to make these diagnoses? Many had heard talks by representatives of drug companies or were briefed by other staff members who had heard these talks. Wow, they're intelligent, aren't they? Thus it was that several thousand grade school students were carrying pills in their pockets or lunch buckets. Almost all were boys. Oh yeah, because of course boys will be boys, won't they? They're fidgety and they like to go out and play football and things like that. So that's really bad, isn't it? What were these pills? What were in these pills? That was the surprise. Mostly they were similar in contents to speed pills, which people can get arrested for carrying without prescription. They were either amphetamine or Ritalin, which has similar effect. I've heard that before. Ritalin has similar effect to speed, and I think that's got a bad press. Ritalin, isn't it? In short, the pills were stimulants. Some other pills were listed by the US Food and Drug Administration as not recommended for the use of children under 12 years old. The public discussion created by the report flushed up the discovery that drugged school children were a fact of life in hundreds of American school systems. The most commonly mentioned estimate then, and bear in mind this is the 1970s, was that at least 250,000 grammar school pupils were on amphetamines or Ritalin, and the number will grow rapidly. Now the estimates range from 500,000 to 500,000 to 2,000,000. The latter figure appeared in a 1976 report in Science Digest. And this is the 70s, isn't it? So, it's probably been going up and up. Well, I'm sure it has. There were also reports that in many school systems, the proportion of pupils on stimulant drugs ran between 10 to 15%. Okay, that's part 9. Let's move on in part 10.